to the next paper presentation already. Christina Oesterheld, I'm sure, is familiar to many of you. She taught Urdu and Urdu literature in Heidelberg University for many years, and she's written very widely on early Urdu fiction, on sort of Urdu writing on emotions, basically anything. She's really, I think in Europe, she's the most widely, yes. I mean, I know her better than I know Anna, but you know, she's the person who's written most widely on modern Urdu fiction. So.
Yeah. So when Margaret mentioned the planned workshop on Jamia's women and named some of the names of women who could be discussed, I immediately knew that I would like to do something on Sughra Mehdi, whose novel Rag Bhupali I had read 30 years ago and still remembered that it had deeply touched me. I'm aware that speaking on her fiction, and that too only on part of it, will not do justice to Sughra Mehdi's lifelong achievements, but to do so would anyway require much more time than will be available within our workshop. And of course, some of her achievements have already been mentioned today. I will come back to some of that. So just to mention a few important aspects, could you please switch to the next slide? No, before, yes. So this is the cover of her memoirs, Hikayat-e Hasti. Here's a very brief outline of her professional career. Sughra Mehdi, originally named Imamat Fatima, was born on 8th August 1937. And you see the dearth of sources is also already can be observed when we go to the internet and find different years for her birth. There you find 38 and even 27. So there are very few reliable sources. And of course, I have to admit that most of the sources I used, I took from the internet, particularly from Richter. And I have got, of course, the pocket edition of Rag Bhupali, and 2 other books were in our library. 3 other books were in our library at the South Asia Institute Heidelberg, but all the other information I really culled from Richter, most of it. And as to archives, but I think her whole collection is with the Jamia, so I think it should be possible to do more archival work on her, maybe even some correspondence may be traced there. Yeah, she was born in Bhopal and passed her childhood in the Qasba Bari and the village Daipur, district Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh, and received her first schooling at home and later in the school in Bari. And in 1950, she was brought to Delhi by her aunt, Mumani Saleh Abid Hussain, who prepared her for admission into Jamia Secondary School, which she joined in 1951, as already mentioned. So she got permission of her parents to enroll her in the school because there was co-education and there was no parda. So it was very strong step to take, very dark step to take. After doing her matric, it was suggested that Sughra should train as a nurse because nursing or teaching at girls' schools were regarded as the only respectable professions for girls. She volunteered 3 months as a nurse, aide in a hospital, and then joined a nursing course but dropped out after an unhappy incident and joined Jamia's newly founded Rural Institute. She continued her education in Aligarh for FA and BA, and while in Aligarh, she chaired the literary circle Bazm-e-Adab and represented the Aligarh Women's College in the editorial office of the Aligarh magazine. Back in Delhi with the intention to earn money to ease the burden on her uncle Abid Hussain's shoulders, she did a B.Ed and in 1961 started to teach at a primary school in Delhi. Later continued to teach at the girls' higher secondary school in Delhi's Balimara. And she wrote that here for the first time she got to know the old city very intimately. At the same time, she did her MA in Nauru as private candidate and hoped for promotion and a permanent job at her school. When neither happened, she resigned and started to work as a freelance scriptwriter for All India Radio. After 1 year again, no proper contract was offered because her rival candidate had a sifarish from Indira Gandhi. For some time, she earned money by doing translations for the National Book Trust of India and then for the journal of the newly founded society, Islam in the Modern Age, also doing all kinds of office work for the society. She continued to work for the society 7 years, all the while also pursuing her education, obtained an MPhil from Delhi University and was accepted into its PhD program, but dissatisfied with Delhi University's Urdu department, continued her PhD at the Jamia under the guidance of Professor Gopi Chand Narang. In 1977, she started to teach in the Urdu department, and from there she retired in 1997, and she died on the 17th March 2014 in Delhi. Since retirement, she became very active in social work for women, particularly Muslim women. Together with Begum Sayyida Hamid, she worked for the rights of Muslim women through the Muslim Women's Forum, whose founder member and sometime vice president she was. And she wrote, in this capacity, she wrote pamphlets, appeared in court, addressed rallies, etc., always arguing for the rights of Muslim women in accordance with the injunctions of the Quran and the Sunnah and the legal verdicts of Muslim ulama. Now, when we turn to her publications, I have prepared a list here, which is not very beautifully put here. Some of the titles as I found them in the sources. Many of the short stories, and can we go to the next slide, please? No, there's one in between. Next slide. Yes. Many of her shorter writing was first published in journals, in popular journals, in the Jamia journal, of course, but also Biswi Sadi, Ajkal, etc. So that was also an outreach into the wider public sphere, much more so than books, I think, through these, and also then sometimes the novels and the other publications also were published in installments in journals before being published in book form. And of course, thus she reached a much wider public than in book form and in the book publications. So there is one collection mentioned here, Arbi Mazamin. In the preface to the collection, she stressed that she saw herself primarily as a fiction writer, but came to write about literature through working on her PhD about Akbar al-Habadi and her teaching of literature. The articles collected here are based on talks during seminars she attended, while she here again, as in her memoirs, mentions that she was not in favor of seminar bazi and attended seminars only when really necessary. The collection contains several articles on women in Urdu literature as topics as well as authors. The last article bears the title Khawateen ki Zaban o Adab ki Khidmat aur Adme Itiraf. So the writing is a language and literature of women and the lack of attention or acknowledgement. And then another important collection is Urdu Navalon mein Aurat ki Samaji Haysiyat. It's a survey of writers from the 19th century until 1947, including many male and female writers who are not mentioned in mainstream histories of Urdu literature, particularly those written in English. And the topics she has given here, concerns of these authors are Parda, Beva, Tabaif, Bejor, Shadi, and also multiple marriages. She, at the end of the book, presents only a very brief outlook on the period since 1947, when she sees new topics as appearing in the writings, problems of working women, lack of control over their earnings, mistrust of their husbands when women go out for work, psychological problems of men caused by their centuries-old predominance, and a growing rate of assaults on women, and of course also the gap between rights granted to women by law and social reality. So Tazkira-e-Jamia has already been mentioned here, so I will not talk about that. And we'll come to, so the next slides. So this is memoirs and biographies. And now the last slide, please, which is a last slide, please. Yeah, this is the last slide, a beautiful picture. She was good friends with Aini Apa, with Qoratullah and Haidar. She had also met Ismat Chugtai, but was not really impressed by her. Of course, she knew Ismat Chughtai's writing, but I think for her, Ismat Chugtai was too frank, especially in her writing about sexual matters. And she reports in her memoir that when she saw what Ismat Chugtai had written in one of the autograph books of one of her fellow students, she said that she decided not to take her autograph. Now let me come to what I call Sughra Mehdi's feminist fiction, and we can maybe discuss also what is her kind of feminism, how far is she a feminist? It is very interesting to look at her biography again when we talk about her fiction, because this had a very deep-reaching impact on her writing and informed many of the central conflicts structuring her novels. One sees that many of the characters and plots of her fiction are related to her personal experience. Particularly important are her memories of childhood and youth as recorded in her RBD. She grew up with 3 elder and 1 younger sister and 2 younger brothers. So she describes how they lived in different environments in a small Daipur village in the Qasba Bari, and then of course in Bhopal, Kanpur, until she came to live in Delhi. She had a very intimate knowledge of the life of extended families in all their aspects: the marital relationships, the relations with in-laws, relations between siblings, and hierarchies of all kinds, and also the generation gap. From her descriptions of family life, one can judge that right from her childhood, she had been a very keen observer of everything going on around her. Thus, she very early witnessed the injustice done to women and the unhappiness caused by mismatched marriages, the discrimination of children that were not fulfilling the elders' expectations, the loneliness of children deprived of a mother's love and care, and many other big and small tragedies of everyday life. But while living in a community of women all around her, family as well as friends, she never expressed antagonism to men. And there was some talk about motherliness. In her writing, very often you see a family in which there is no motherliness, where young children are deprived of mothers by different causes, due to different reasons. And the effect this had on the children, the sense of loneliness. And she is very outspoken and does not shrink back from open criticism of her own immediate family, who slighted her because of her meager appearance and her bad looks, a face marked by pockmarks, and the dark color of her skin. This maltreatment and the weakness caused by her illness resulted in a strong inferiority complex, which she could only overcome when she got the attention and love of her aunt Salia Abid Hussain, who had lost a daughter, as we heard, right at birth, and slowly adopted her as her daughter, renaming her Sughra. And Athalia Abed Hussain also recognized the intellectual potential of the girl and did everything to get her educated. And in her memoirs, she writes that she feels that actually she got reborn, or she got really born, when she was in Thalia Abed Hussain's care. Lack of maternal love becomes a recurrent theme in her novels. In her case, it was caused by the bipolar disorder of her mother, and further accentuated by the strained relationship of her mismatched parents who often quarreled, and by the antagonism between mother and mother-in-law, also a recurrent theme. Watching unhappy marriage, not only in the case of her parents, very early led her to the resolve never to marry, another recurrent theme in her fiction. When her maternal uncle Abed Hussain later mentions marriage to her, she declares that she does not want to marry but to pursue her career and to continue to write. She was just writing her first novel then, but she had started writing very early and publishing in children's magazines. So her uncle did not pressure her to marry, but told her that it would be not easy to lead a solitary life as a single woman. Sughra Mehdi also freely admits to being short-tempered, stubborn, self-opinionated, and quarrelsome. She had no tolerance for hypocrisy and sycophancy and a strong sense of justice. Combined with her rebellious nature, this seems often to have made life difficult for her in her professional career, and such problems resurface in some of her works. All central female protagonists clearly bear the stamp of her own character traits. But that does not mean that her stories are Sughra Mehdi's own stories. I mean, they are combinations of many other elements. Rather, they combine stories of women she had known in her life with her own vision of how women could and should live. The memoirs also give a clear picture of how she developed her feminist leanings and what feminism meant to her. As her first lesson in feminism, she describes the relationship between Dr. Abed Hussain's first wife, as we already heard, who lived apart from him in the village, and his second, much younger wife, Thalia Abed Hussain, who treated the first wife respectfully and left all affairs of the property to her. Sughra Mehdi concludes, women should always support each other and respect each other's rights. Wherever that does not happen, injustice, resentment, and unhappiness result. And she saw a lot of that. She observes that slowly women begin to perform a custom that formerly had been restricted to the birth of boys for newborn girls also. In her memoirs, she interprets this as a conscious or unconscious leveling of the different attitudes towards boys and girls. She witnessed how many women of the family left the Parda and began to take an active part in cultural and literary activities, particularly for the betterment of Muslim women. Her aunt, Thalia Abed Hussain, was a shining example for her in this regard. Sughra Mehdi mentions that her aunt wrote a play demonstrating the evil outcome of forced marriages, that is, without the consent of the girl. Bunyadi Haq was the title of the drama. Unfortunately, a problem we encounter in Germany to this date in certain Muslim communities. She remembers how her scarcely educated aunt, Anis Apa, who had never heard the word feminism, told a young girl of the family that she was no burden to the family because she was standing on her own feet and could look for herself whether she would find a suitable marriage partner or not. And if not, it would also be no shame to live on one's own. So these were some of the feminist lessons she mentions in her memoir. Now, when we look at selected novels, I will talk about two of them only. The central topic of her writing is the life of women and, to a somewhat lesser degree, men in the family and beyond. In passing, she refers to historical events such as the partition of India, communalist riots, the exodus of Muslims to Pakistan, also the tendency of many young men in the Muslim community to go abroad for studies and for employment, the growing antagonism between Hindus and Muslims, but also very critically, she deals with the westernized ways of the upper class, But all these topics are dealt with only in relation to the immediate life of her characters. So, skipping her first brief novella, Kuidaj Ashna Binahi, I will turn to her first novel, Parba Julan, a title taken from a poem by Faiz Ahmed Faiz, Aaj Bazar Mein Parba Julan Chalo. As we will see, the fetters of the title, fetters at the feet, are not only social norms and customs, but also fetters of love and affection and responsibility. In the novel, we follow the main protagonist, Sahba, from childhood to adolescence. Like Sughra Mehdi, she has elder sisters, but only one brother. Here we again encounter the motive of the lack of maternal love. The girl's mother has been driven out of the house by her mother-in-law because of an alleged affair with a cousin. This act has devastated the whole family, including the children, husband and wife. Until the end, it does not become fully clear how far this alleged affair really went, but all attempts of Alabi, a female relative of the father who comes to the rescue to raise the children, fail to heal the wounds and reconcile husband and wife. Sehba's brother has been given away to be raised as by a childless aunt who loved him dearly, but he was not treated well by her in-laws. He felt totally rejected and remains estranged from the family till the end. The dishonor allegedly brought over the family by the mother also impairs the chances of her daughters ever to get married. So there's an episode which is quite similar to Chautika Jora, Isma Chodai's story, when a young man from the family comes and he's fed with all the good things, and they really have to incur debts to feed him and care for him, look after him, and then he goes away, and no marriage proposal follows, and one of the girls dies. Then this Alabi comes to the house and looks after the family, and also Alab, especially after Alab Sehba. And Sehba is allowed to go to the next town for a BA and stays in a hostel with her Hindu neighbor friend Madhu. And there she goes out, takes part in theater productions, and meets numbers of boys. And now we have, as in many stories, here we don't have a lack of romance. In Sughra Mehdi's stories, we have romance. We have boy meets girl or girl meets boy. So we have all kinds of love stories. And here it is the story of first Madhu, her Hindu friend, who falls in love, and Akshay, a Bengali Hindu, falls in love with Madhu, and he proposes, and finally also the family agrees to this proposal. But then a next love story comes up, and that is between Madhu's brother Mahendra, who had been her brother-like childhood friend, and they both fall in love. And now Mahendra announces that he wants to marry her, and declares that he will just go to her father and propose. And then Sapa comes. Now we have the problem that he doesn't think of the consequences. She says that, I mean, we can't do this. I mean, the whole family, they will have to break with the family, and we will be completely on our own after that, and there will be a huge scandal. But he wants to go through with it. And after much talking, and she can convince him that they cannot do that. She cannot do that to her parents. It's not only because of the shock and the hurt, the pain she would cause the parents. Her father is ailing, he's old, and she is now the person to also support the family. The brother has gone abroad, he's away, he doesn't look after the family, so she's the whole support of the family also. So she has taken over the role of the boy in the family. And she's doing it full of love. I mean, it's not only responsibility she feels. So finally, they decide that they postpone it until things get better between the communities, and maybe both families would be able to accept that marriage. Which, of course, is wishful thinking, I think. But in this way, the novel ends opened. I mean, there's an open end. And Interestingly, Sughra Mehdi had stated in the final remarks of her study on the position of women that since 1947, considerations of religion and caste have become less important in marriage. But here she seems reluctant to actually portray such a union. And in view of the atmosphere prevailing in both households, it was definitely more realistic also to postpone such a possibility until a very uncertain future. So now I have to skip much of that and want to continue with the novel I had mentioned in the beginning, Rag Bhupali, which I think, to my mind, it was published in 1984. There's another year of publication given there, but I think 1984 is more likely. The title, in her own words, alludes to the central character of the story, Rabia. Like the Ragini, she is neither incomplete nor fulfilled or complete. Rag Bhupali has only 5 notes. But of course, otherwise it's regarded as full rag, and it's a very majestic rag also, and very, very popular in folk as well as film songs. So Rabia, in her own way, also is a very majestic figure. In the first novel I have discussed here already, we have different perspectives on the characters and on the story. But the main perspective that is given is that by Serpa. Here in this novel, we have more weight given to the other perspectives, not only that of the central character. And the narrative structure also is more complex with more flashbacks. So we have a starting scene, an opening scene, which goes back to the early childhood, the memory of the central character of her early childhood. And this is about one of her first experiences of women's deprivation and hardship. And I just would like to read out a few sentences. The opening scene is in a very festive, joyful atmosphere. The family is preparing for an outing, and the bullock carts have been decorated, and they have got up very early in the morning and set out on the journey. And they went through the village and called for Uncle Shamshad to come out and join them, but he doesn't come. So the little girl is sent to fetch him from the house. So, and now we have her story. अच्छा हम अभी हाल बुलाकर लाते हैं, ये कहकर उसने गाड़ी से एक छलांग लगाई थी और भट से दरवाज़ा खोलकर शमशाद चा के घर में घुस गई थी. शमशाद चा और फिर वो वहीं ठिठक गई. बावर्ची खाने की दहलीज पर शमशाद शाह की बीवी बैठी थी और वो उनको भारी बूट से मार रहे थे. उनका सफ़ेद चुनरदार गोल घेर का कुर्ता खून में लथपथ था. गुलाबी चुनी हुई दुपट्टे के दोनों पल्लू ज़मीन पर लटक रहे थे. उनकी भौं फट गई थी और आंगन में खड़ी शमशाद शाह की माँ कह रही थी, अरे मौत पड़ी के कह रही थी कि मर्द से ज़बान मत लड़ा. शमशाद शाह वो ज़ोर से चीखी और उनका उठा हुआ हाथ रुक गया. भाई तुम चलो, मैं अभी हाल आया, ये कहकर वो अपनी बीवी को गालियाँ देने लगी. So now the girl, of course, the whole festive atmosphere is destroyed for the girl. It's such a contrast, it's such a shock. And then, of course, here we have many more stories of women. For instance, about one of the aunts who is a very joyful, very lively character, very beautiful, but her husband treats her very badly, and she very often comes back, runs away, comes back to the house. But her own mother will always send her back to the husband. And when after several years the girl sees her again, she is completely drained, completely numbed, behiss, and only fusses over her husband. I mean, she has lost all her personality and her individuality. So time is up. So here, this story now is the story of a failed marriage. And here, the interesting thing is that first the novel develops in such a way that we side with the female main character, with Rabia. But slowly then it appears that, of course, her husband was not treated, he slapped her once in a quarrel and then she left him immediately after that. But he wanted to reconcile and she was very stubborn and headstrong and she did not take the chance. And also she, in hindsight, realizes that very much could have been better in their relationship had both been more accommodating and tried for compromises. If she had been brought up in such a way as to really strive for independence and for always fulfill her desires, for intentions, and stand on her own feet, be very independent. But he wants to get all this in a very aggressive way, in a very unrelenting, uncompromising way. And also she, through her upbringing, is not able to respond to his more emotive, romantic moments. So in a way, the marriage fails because both of them are not able to accommodate and compromise. So here we have a novel which in many characters shows that men and women suffer from such relationships if they cannot work out a good relationship, although this has been a love marriage. But even love marriages not always are successful. But again, here in the novel we have many statements, many concerns of Sughra Mehdi, very subtle concerns, which also form this character. The wish to stand on one's own feet, the wish to have one's own ghar, apna makan, not to be sent away. I mean, why should my parental home be a pariah ghar? Why should I go to apna ghar only when it is the ghar of the husband? Not to burden children, boys as well as girls, with marriage too early. Yeah, not to always be after them and present long lists of candidates to them, not listening to their own wishes and voices. So there are many concerns here which we could call feminist concerns. But it is a feminism within the boundaries of respectability. Women will go out to work, girls will get an education, but they will act in such a way as to not bring disrepute to their families. They will maintain the family honor. They will abide by the social norms as they accept them as just, as long as they can accept them as justified. Yeah. So I think with this I have to stop. But it is a very complex novel, and in many ways, all these emotional conflicts between siblings, between brother and sister in this case, the very strong conflict between brother and sister, between husband and wife, between, of course, here the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law and such things, they are brought in a very intense way. So in a way, it is a continuation of this writing of Ismat Chugtai or Rashid Jahan. She doesn't address lower classes. It's only about the middle class and upper middle class. But in its own way, it's a novel which speaks about human relationships beyond its own milieu. So there are many things in the novel I could also relate to. And in that way, it also attracted me very much, and that's why I also remember the novel for 30 years. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We have now half an hour for discussion. As you were both talking, I was trying to think, okay, is there anything that links your your two talks and also links them to Jamia and to the some of the institution building, some of the building of also an environment that we heard before, and that seemed to be more to come more directly for Behram Asifa Mujib's sort of the kind of the combination of the welcoming, easy, sort of creating and helping to maintain a kind of informal and welcoming atmosphere, and also the children's stories. But then also you brought in the more this other side of the that in a way brought her writing the desire for this azadi ki chamak, or the kind of a desire for some space and not actually abiding to rules or expectations, that seemed to bring her sensibility or her writing closer to Sughra Mehdi. So I suppose a question for more for Christina, but also maybe for you, is to see how do you place the writing in relation to it seems to be a very different as we know, women's Urdu writing, I mean, is wonderfully rich, and very, very rich language-wise, very rich in kind of depiction of nuances, and probably quite different from the kind of Urdu that is taught in Urdu department, or that was taught in Urdu departments as Urdu literature. So how does this kind of how would you place their writing and their sensibility in relation to, say, Urdu-e-Jamia, for example, or in fact in other institutions? And the other is, going back perhaps to some of the discussion this morning, is to see, what are they contributing in terms of, I mean, we know, again, sorry, going a bit round and round, but I'll get to my point. Again, we know that Urdu women's magazines are, incredibly rich. They're certainly richer than, and many more than in Hindi. Urdu, women in Urdu seems to take to writing as a form of communication with each other, imagination. I mean, lots of travelogue or imagined travel, much more than in Hindi magazines. I think, there's really an explosion of women's magazines in Urdu, more than in Hindi, and perhaps, more than other languages. So magazines, perhaps, and of course magazines, and then the writing, often speak of girls and women who don't go to school, who have their education at home, and who don't go out to work either. So all the drama is within the home and within, in fact, the relationships and and the desires, but that often cannot even be voiced within the home. And at the same time, it seems to me. So again, how do you think that their writing contributes or fits within the broader field of Urdu writing and magazines? And the third point was about Sharafat, because I think when we read about Sharafat and conduct in the 19th century, whether it's Tanvi's Bhishti Zevar or Nazir Ahmad, it's a much more straight and narrow Sharafat. You don't have much you don't have much space, do you? No, I mean, it's all about what you should do and norms and so on. And here it seems to me that in this writing, Sharafat is more like a very broad, a very broad, or almost like a limit, a very broad limit, within which all kinds of things happen that are not very Sharif at all, in fact. So it's almost like a face and there also seems to be a great deal of criticism, of the family, of the, how children are treated, how their needs are not met, and so on, and a lot of frustration. So, it seems to me there's an articulation of Sharafat that is very different from what from what we see otherwise. And so I wonder if you had something more to say about that as well.
Is of course that you will not, of course, have affairs. I mean, that is completely out of the question. Yeah, you won't have affairs, of course. No, that's you won't go out to clubs and drink and dance with other men. So such things, of course, are the limits. But otherwise, yes, I think. Of course, what Sughra Mehdi mentions several times is that, but it's now difficult when we go out to work and we work with men, we are in the workplace. It is still difficult to somehow negotiate the relationship with colleagues at work because we are not accustomed, not yet, I mean, we not yet have a relaxed attitude. Especially in men too. I mean, not only in women. Or sometimes men, of course, start to be romantic about and I misuse such opportunities created by the new situation with women in the workplace. So that is a problem women face now as soon as they go out to work. And also they are a loss of protection. Because I mentioned now there are more assaults on women because they are more out in the open. But otherwise, of course, you had many assaults on women within the family and within the house. Yes? So, I mean, that's quite another question. What I wanted to, because you said the relationship to Jamia, of course, this book of memoirs, Hikayat-e-Hasti, is a very rich source on Jamia also, because she describes, when she comes to Delhi, of course, she describes the coming together of the families and how they lived, the frugality and the hospitality, fraternity and all that. So I just want to remind you of that it's also a very rich source. And I really think that these things should be translated into English, because we have a younger generation who does not read Nastalik, for instance. How will they ever be able to get these sources? Let me go to these sources. But coming back to your other question, I think respectability is now seen in a broader way. But still, I mean, Sughra Mehdi is quite conservative when it comes to westernized ways of life. When it really goes to, dancing with other men or drinking alcohol, for instance. I mean, there are some limits still. And she has been quite critical of young women, for younger generation, who, take all these liberties, which she finds already transgress, past the boundary.
But if I may add, like in Angan of Khadija Massoud, you've got the aunt who's English, is all westernized and anglicized and so on. But almost like she is the one, she's so other that then allows the girl to actually criticize everything and everyone in the house while remaining a good, the sort of a source of moral, a moral side. So, as we know, having the westernized other woman allows you, actually, it's quite an enabling strategy rather than...
one thing, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, there is one, in the internet, you find one short story, Gharib Khana, read out. So in YouTube, you can... Yes, it's a good read. I mean, and it's interesting because here you have all these stereotypes that we had our morals, we were frugal, we were very modest in our attitudes in our old times, and everything was fine. And now we have these neighbors who are newly rich and consumerist, and very strongly criticized. And in the end, then this the girl of the family. She tells her mother, well, but you supposed to be so tolerant. Why can't you tolerate that things are changing and people are different, have different values than your own? And then the mother finally, she said, yes, of course, you are right.
Yeah, I just want to address your question on akhlaq. I think, of course, like it's a broad area. Yeah, it's a broad. So it's a very broad sort of. Uh, it's working. I think it's working. Yeah. The thing what Begum Asfa Mujib is trying to do is that she's trying to put it in two different categories. One is akhlaq for performance, like a performative element of akhlaq, which, for example, in Bade Miyan ki Yaad mein, in which his son organizes this big luncheon, and he's portraying himself. He's sort of performing as this very good son, taking care of his mother, like forcing her to eat, like eat more pulao. Like she's literally mourning her husband, and for him, the luncheon is the is like a performance. And what Begum Asfa Mujib is trying to do is trying to sort of critique that there are ways to be sharif. But this is not one of them. It might look like it. It might you can sort of put a good face, put a picture where you may seem like in the community, but there are other things like taking care of your neighbor, for example. You should have sent them food on time so they could have eaten. So I think from that perspective, I think she's coming from. And another thing that I had to mention, but I forgot, was she had two sons, and the elder one passed away when he was 20. She and this book that I discussed, Parinder Dusre Afsane, she dedicated to her son. And we have her the younger son's daughter here. I think she was sitting there. Okay. Okay. So she was also here. She joined us, and she said how she mentioned we spoke for a little bit, and she mentioned how the death of the first son, the eldest son, the firstborn, was too much for the family to bear. It was a lot of stress. It was a lot of emotional stress on the family, including Begum Asfa Mujib, and Muhammad Mujib, and even the younger son who did live. So I think a lot of like loneliness and aloofness, a lot of sentimentality that is in her stories is coming from a place of deep pain and hurt also.
Just one thing I forgot to mention also. There was, yes, just a very brief remark. There is a reference to Nazir Ahmed when Sehpa has this conflict with her parents about the marriage. Then her friend Madhu says that, and she says, "I can't become an Asghari." But then the friend says, "Yes, but you should also not be a Kalim."
Right. So yes, questions from the audience?
Can I
Sure.
I don't think there's a lot of time for questions. So my comments, I just have two comments, and I'll keep it very brief. I really want to say this is a very rich session, because for me, having seen Asifa Mujib and being very close to Sughra Mehdi, the way you have Christina and Anab, what you have done, I think I'm really very moved, and also I really want to compliment you and you for your very capable chairing. I want to say that for Anab, I want to, maybe later on, because there's no time for a long answer. I should stand. Asifa Mujib, and when you spoke about her stories, there is this whole thing, I mean, her whole personality, she's right there before you. She's, and you expressed her personality very well. But something was in her that it was always, this little girl running away, wanting her freedom, this boy being picked up in a comfort of a home, wanting his freedom, coming from Sandila, coming from a very affluent family, and then, facing this terrible tragedy of her son Muin. What was it? I mean, something which maybe you as a scholar could perhaps, if you had more time, you could do that. But would be very interested in knowing. So, and for Christina, I want to say that, Sughra Mehdi, you expressed the anger that she had. And that's very important because the way she looked, her complexion, and we've all seen her go through all those stages, and then Saliha Abid Hussein's influence on her. But that anger just persisted throughout to the end of her days. It persisted also in a very positive manner. And for me, was something which, I learned, and I mean, for me, this was just part of my, so I can't look at it in any detached manner. But what you have done with it and how you've expressed it, especially vis-a-vis Rag Bhopali and the characters of Rag Bhopali, so extremely complex, even more complex in a sense than Asifa Mujib. Very, very complex. And so I think that was a great presentation, and I think we'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderfully put. Thank you for your comments. More questions?
Hi, thank you so much. I will echo the fact that this has been very rich and very interesting panel. I mean, this is just out of curiosity and not really knowing about the circulation of some of these texts that you're talking about, both of you. And I'm wondering about the readership of these the novels, the short stories, because it seems like they are generating a very interesting discourse about femininity, about women's agency, their voice. I'm wondering how that translates into the public sphere. Who the people perhaps reading these, and how that is perhaps impacting them, and what are the kind of transitions in their lives that these short stories are perhaps generating. This, just if there is a way of even mapping that, is also something I'm interested in.
Is there any other question that okay, yes, maybe we can take.
Thank you both for very interesting presentations. My question is for Anna, essentially. You talked about the parda of, the name being displayed, how her father was worried that somebody would have seen her name, or how many people would have seen her name on the envelope. This is not an Islamic thing, is it? How would you interpret it? Or would you believe that would you consider that this is essentially Indian, sociological? Because this was an aspect, that women debated with regard to parda. How stringent was it in India? Thank you.
Any other question? Urgent question?
Regarding Anab, sorry. This story about Parind. Would you like to read it from a gendered point of view?
Okay. To answer Sarah's question first, this collection was published in 1954, and two editions are available to my knowledge. One was published out of Jamia, Maktaba-e-Jamia in Delhi, and they had an office in Bombay as well. Another edition came out of that, another with different cover and everything. So, and of course, I really am clueless about the readership they had. She wrote a lot of material for children in Payam-e-Talim, and I was going through many editions of Payam-e-Talim, but a lot of their content is authored as Idara. So and her name is not there on a lot of magazines, but Saliha Abid Hussain writes about her, and she says that she wrote for Payam-e-Talim. So I'm assuming that she wrote under the name of Idara, that she must have contributed under that name, because half of the content it says Idara. So I'm not sure who exactly comprised the Idara. So yeah, I mean, not a sufficient answer, but yeah, there.
के लिए जो लिखते थे, जाकिर साहब ने अपनी बेटी के नाम से लिखा है, और बेसिकली वो जाकिर साहब की तहरीरें हैं प्याम-ए-तालीम में बहुत सी। तो ऐसा प्याम-ए-तालीम, क्योंकि जाकिर साहब चाहते थे कि बच्चों के लिए बहुत अच्छा लिटरेचर लिखवाए, तो फोर्स करते थे सब लोगों को, भाई तुम लोग लिखो। तो बहुत से लोगों ने इदारे के नाम से लिखा है, बिकॉज़ आई एम वर्किंग ऑन इट।
ओके, हाँ, तो आसिफा मुजीब ने भी उन्हीं के नाम ऐसे ही लिखा है जी।
I didn't find this book because I'm collecting books for Rekhta, and I was surprised how come I didn't read this book you're mentioning. So I'm
Paringo
glad
Dusra
I've
Afsane.
heard of that book now.
Okay.
Okay?
Uh,
I'll scan it.
So, and to answer Fatima ma'am's question, I do not think that it's a Muslim question. I think the question of exposing a woman's name in public is, very uniquely South Asian problem, um, because the ideas of honor, the ideas of parda, they were all sort of parallel in Hindu and Muslim communities, in other communities. So I think that is where this was coming from. And I wanted actually to talk about Zebu she's a teenage girl. Her exact age is not mentioned, but Aziza Begum, who takes her in, she says that if you are a good girl, I'll get you married. And when she says that, Zebu gets very excited. It's it's a topic, it's a conversation that really excites her, and she is, at one of the in one part of the story, Bua Nasiban, she's like, as the name suggests, she's chiding Zebu. She's telling, you mend your ways, you become like a good girl, and you learn all the manners of, running a household and everything. And Zebu standing in front of a mirror, and she's cleaning the mirror, and she sort of loses herself for a little bit, and she doesn't care about the household activities of being married. Herself, her looks, her sexuality is what interests her when she talks, when the marriage question is, brought up. So definitely, there is, and that could just would have taken over a lot of space. So I did not really delve into that. But definitely, there is a strong, and her desire to go out and roam the streets in a guise of a boy. I mean, that itself makes it clear that she wishes to be free from the gendered jail, so to say, prison that she is in. So yeah.
When we talk about circulation, as I mentioned, many of the short stories, also the travelogues and parts of the novels were serialized in magazines. So they had a much wider circulation than books, I think. But even the books have several editions. Some of them one or two have even 3 editions. And of course, we must not forget that many of what she has published as short stories were broadcast by the radio. There's one thing maybe you can answer. There is one PhD thesis on Sughra Mehdi, and I think there the author mentions that Rag Bhupali was also telecast or something. Does anybody know about that? I couldn't find any information about that. Do you know anything?
She was the director of this Doordarshan series. Her name is Rabia Naski. She was a student at MCRC at that time. So, I met her recently, and she mentioned that she has made, and she had shown it to Sughra Appa, and Sughra Appa's reaction to it was, it was too literal.
I see.
But there is a series by Doordarshan of Purvai.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Nishat.
Well, I have questions for both. Anna, you first. Since Asifa Mujib was writing for children, and then she wrote these stories which are so complex. So how do you see these two together? I mean, what were the continuities or discontinuities, and what were the reasons of these continuities or discontinuities? That is my question to you. And to Christina, as you said, it's a very complex novel, the novel that you discussed. But I'm just curious, what is the concept of love that emerges here? Because if we look at Saleha Abid Hussain, who raised Sughra Mehdi, and I'm sure Sughra Mehdi must have been influenced by the kind of fiction that Saleha Abid Hussain was writing. And she was writing almost till 70, 78 was when her last collection was published, last novel was published. So in a way, or they must have been publishing almost, at the same time. So I'm just wondering, I mean, because the world that Saleha presents is different. In fact, towards the end, the novels that she published, her later novels are, more complex than her earlier ones. Still, that is a world where, there are certain values, certain emotions which are, sacrosanct, respected. But here, what I gathered from your presentation is that, love becomes very complex emotion. So what do you have to say about that, if you can?
I think most of her writings are for children. There is literally only one book of her. Yeah, it's very complex, exactly. No, it is not. And I was also surprised. I was not expecting this at all when I first read. I cried a lot also. It was very moving. It was very sad. It has. It just seemed like a different person who was writing these two kind of literature. It was nothing. Nothing was similar. Her writing style is, I could say, lucid for both for of course for children. It's like fairly simple moral stories, but with this there was like a certain kind of and I fail at least to see, maybe you can, or maybe someone else can see some continuity, but it's felt like a completely different person who was writing. It did not seem like they had that she was the one who was writing all this like jolly, uplifting, fun literature for children, and at the same time she was also writing these really sort of dark and sad and painful literature, which was just like, honestly, like a very sad very sad to read, and it was just difficult to read. It was, yeah, it was, it's very complex, definitely, when to say the least. And no, I don't see any continuity at all, in fact. Please.
Yeah, you see, of course, these are not Islahi novels. You have a lot of drama, you have the love stories, you have romance, and you have all kinds of conflicts because of conflicting interests, desires, and there is, of course, love between young boys and girls, which sometimes ends in a marriage. There's also stories where we have a marriage, but in most cases it is rather open-ended, or you have arranged marriages which are a catastrophe, or arranged marriages which are said to work, but these are not interesting then. They are just at the sideline, they are at the margins. So they are not dealt with much. So she's more interested in the complexities of human relationships. And so you have sometimes almost love-hate relationships, for instance, between brother and sister in Rag Bhupali. Because the boy, he was the only boy in the household. So of course he assumed that he would inherit much of the property and the house, etc., and he would support the parents when they grow old. But she has separated from her husband, and then he goes back home to the parents, and she takes over. And he is sidelined. So then he goes abroad because he cannot stand the situation. His male ego is, of course, hurt, and his understanding of masculinity and his right as the boy in the family. But at the same time, he loves her. So it is a very complex relationship. And there are many things like that in the novels. So I think we don't have one-sided characters. There's no black and white. Apart from some, very marginal characters, but otherwise all the main characters are very complex and not stereotypical also.
Any final question? Any final question or comment from anyone? I would. I thought was what came up both very strongly was this critical eye, this critical eye, and also the kind of the kashamkash, I suppose, with Azadi being khuddar, too much khuddar, what is good, but at the same time a sort of an appreciation of strength and the complexity of emotion. So I think we all want to go and read the books. So thank you very much for the presentations. And I think we have half an hour before the cultural performance. No, is it? Okay, right away. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you again to the